being that look at this little formal thing I have to do because you have to start this off. But Ginny doesn't know that the whole format has changed. Ginny, you have to, before I get you in, you have to tell us about the conference. So let me put that little poster up, and you have to tell us about the conference. So please, what is it about?
Absolutely. So this is the World Mediators Conference, and we are in the last week of the conference, which started on May 18th, celebrating World Mediator Day and Ken Cloke's birthday. And Mediator Vikram, who is based in India, has been hosting a wide range of conversations this entire month for this conference from people all over the world, talking about issues important to mediators and to the community in general. So I appreciate the opportunity to participate, and I've met such amazing people, and I've learned a lot as well. So thank you, Mediator Vikram.
Thank you, Jeannie. Thank you. It just sounds so nice when someone else talks about it. Otherwise, I would be repeating the same things. So that's the good part. The other thing is, look, it goes on. Look, sessions go on till next Wednesday. And Thursday, then we have the last day when we discuss the learnings and key takeaways. So 29th is like the last sessions as such. And then 30th, just a last discussion as to what we took from there. Of course, all the sessions are recorded and kept on YouTube. Just search Mediator Vikram, you'll find the channel. So that's what it is. So Ginny is talking about terminology and mediation. So please, you have to lead the conversation. Then Leila and I will come in when you want us to come in.
Absolutely. And just by way of introduction, I'm in Minnesota, which is a state in the northern United States that borders Canada. And the background that you see here are actually the northern lights, the aurora borealis, which you can sometimes see from in Minnesota. So it's an unusual phenomenon. Leila, did you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah. Yes, Leila, a little bit, whatever you want.
Thank you, Jenny and Vikram. I'm happy to be here. I've been hearing about the wonderful work that's been happening, and this is the first time I am getting to meet both of you. It's really very encouraging to know that there are people out there who are thinking more deeply about mediation and trying to retain the real flavors of this concept. So thank you for inviting me here.
Thank you, Leila, for being here. So, Ginny, you want to also, Leila, you want to tell us a little bit about yourself? Why don't you? It'll be good for Ginny also.
Sure. And go ahead.
I've been a lawyer since the past 30 years, practiced in the High Court and the Supreme Court, and when I was invited to set up a mediation center in our city, I really didn't know the difference between mediation and meditation. The Chief Justice invited me, and you don't say no to the Chief Justice. But I believe it was providential, because that was exactly the time that I felt in my heart that I was meant for something a little different now. I was in my early 50s at that time, and I felt I need to really invest my life energies now for something else. And coming into mediation, I really felt I belong. So I worked with a court annex program, and then I realized that mediation is not to be only in the courts. In fact, it is rather contradictory. So we need to move away. And so I started CAMP, which is a private mediation space where people with a real passion for mediation can come and practice this art, and where people who are looking for good mediation services can find that. So that's where I am.
Perfect.
Trying to build up that.
Well, that's what you need. We need to develop it outside the court, and I think that's where the focus should be. So, Jeannie, you want to tell us a bit about yourself also? Do you want anything more, or you just want to hit the topic? Your wish.
Well, I want to build off of what Leila said as far as being in the community. So my work has been in community mediation, which is a social justice movement in the United States that grew out of the 1964 Civil Rights Act. And the idea is that everyone should have access to mediation, to alternative ways of resolving disputes or managing conflict, and repairing harm, so restorative justice as well, and that everyone can learn the skills of mediation. So that idea of training people to become mediators all the way down to, preschoolers to help, with basics, to peer mediators in high school and college, to people from all walks of life who then help others with their conflicts. And so part of what community mediation is about is accessibility, providing access to people across the country, to be attentive to things like race, gender, bias, power, that may not manifest or may not be addressed, particularly in the court, in the legal setting. So we are truly an alternative, although we would rather have the courts be the alternative.
But so Leila, from that you'll make out that I still have work to do. When Jeannie says that, look, there are people who have the skill, she's not going to be putting that into them. That's the day where I will say, yes, I have reached somewhere. Up till then, we'll accept what Jeannie is saying. Yes, Jeannie, you'll make mediators for some time. Okay. So Jeannie, what the topic, terminology and mediation.
So Vikram, when you and I first met a while ago, we talked about the language that we use in mediation and how much the court system, at least in the United States, has infused their language into the mediation process. And so part of this conversation is to think about how we might push back a little bit and reclaim the language of the people who are participating in the process. And in particular, these are people, these are not parties. So a party, and this is one of my, pet peeves, so media, that the minute we start talking about the parties in the process, we are using legal terminology. And so if we talk about the people who are experiencing conflict or the participants in the process, even words like disputants can be labeling those who are participating. So how do we rehumanize? How do we humanize what it is that we are actually doing and step away from all of the legal trappings that have been put, at least in the United States, have been put on the process. So let's talk about the fact that these are people. And keep using those terms and to catch yourself every time you say parties. It's like, oh my goodness, why am I using that word? Where is that coming from? Because it changes how the person perceives it in the process. Am I a party to a legal process, or am I a person having a conflict with another person? And for example, Jessica Cookta-Miller, who's an ombuds I think in Missouri, she used to be with our program. She's a Mitchell Hamlin School or a Hamlin School of Law graduate. When you get our voice message on the phone, if you're calling and you don't have a person picking up the phone, instead of defining what mediation is, for example, the message used to say, I'm not sure what it says today because I'm not there anymore, but it used to say, we help people experiencing conflict talk about what is important to them. Broad, open. We're going to help you have that conversation. So just a really, hopefully an invitation rather than, here's what mediation is, and it's a 5-step or 3-step or 9-step process, and et cetera. So that's one of the things. And so, Leila, I don't know, or Mediator Vikram, what are your thoughts about that? Am I off on left field somewhere?
Yeah, Leila agrees with you. So please, Leila, what do you think?
Well, Jenny, this is so good. that you are looking at it beyond the wrappings. Because very often we get caught in just the wrappings and forget to have the real changes. So when I'm going to note down what you said. We help people in conflict talk about what is important to them, and I'm going to use that. This is wonderful.
So that's, I mean, these are the things which actually the perception of people, the user, finally it's the user, we have to change their perception. And that's what I've said, like she's saying that the court system has given certain words to the process, which we have to move away. And luckily in a country like ours, definitely there's so much that has not happened, luckily, where we can actually create the foundation in the right way. I think that's what, I mean, I think that would work. So yes, Jeannie, tell us more.
So another example, and I hope, and I imagine that you two will have some of your own, is at least in the United States, mediators often refer to how they start the process as their opening statement. Okay, so it really puts a sense of import to the mediator. I am doing an opening statement. And then you get to have a statement, and then you get to have a statement. And what in the community mediation world, it's an orientation to the process. We're going to start off here by me and my co-mediator, by the two of us telling you a little bit about this process, or telling you about this process, how it works, see what questions you may have before we get started. And so again, that's, we talk about when we write the agreement, and are you calling it a settlement or are you calling it an agreement? There's another semantic difference, right? It's an agreement. They're agreeing to do things. And so we talk about on the agreement side to use the participants' language, to not make it all official sounding. What are the words that they are choosing to use? Let's put that in the agreement. And then the same thing on the front end of the process. Let's talk about this. It's an orientation to what is going to happen. So it's really showing that contrast between what would happen in a court. So I'm going to do my opening statement, or am I going to sit with you and help you understand what's going to, how this might likely unfold.
Yeah, the informality of it, definitely. The connection with the process starts from there. Yes, Leila, what do you think? That sounds all right to you?
Absolutely, absolutely. Because connection is the most important. From my experience of mediation, half the job is done when we connect to the parties, and the words we use is very crucial. We can start off or derail right at the beginning.
Yeah, absolutely. So that, I think that's the important thing, that first of all, again, what I do is we won't even talk about the court system. Let's start with the basics here itself, because what that process has brought in, definitely there are issues there. But I think this is a good thing to talk about, the words that can be used, the change of language, orientation sounds good. Yes, Jeannie. So what else? Please take us through your thoughts, your words.
Well, and this hopefully is a conversation. So other examples that we might have where we are using, again, language that might not be familiar to the participants, or language that might fuel the conflict. So when you talk about tell your side, right, or each side will have that chance to talk, you're using positional language that can fuel the differences. You have this side and you have this side, as opposed to saying something like, Vikram, would you please tell us the situation from your perspective? So your perspective is legitimate. Leila's perspective is legitimate. What are your perspectives, not your side? Because the minute you use a word like side, you've reinforced that positionality.
Yep, interesting. Absolutely. We're listening. Leila, whenever you want to come in, please, because Jeannie is now, because she's going to stop, tell us to ponder. We pondered over it. It's, yes, all the things that you're saying are very important. Don't. But, yeah, Leila has something to say. Leila has something to say. Yeah, Leila.
Really, this is the creativity of mediation. There's nothing hard and fast. It's like the Vikram, the Jugalbandi that we do. The part that's a kind of a music where one person starts and the other picks up and continues, and then it goes back to the other person. So each one creates the music based on what the other one has done. And I find mediation very much that you cross the river by feeling the storms. So you are sensitive to what your party is. And I use the wrong word, party. What the people in front of you are. So that kind of a sensitivity is very important in mediation. It's not something that comes so easily, but that's what we are striving for. That's what we are striving for.
Yeah, the whole idea being that we're all working together to reach a point which everyone is kind of all right with, that kind of thing. So it's all a process that everyone is part of, not like you are there, this person is there, and we're trying to just get their whatever their side, like you said, not getting the side into it. We're all participating in it together, and I think that comes in, at least that when that connection happens, I think that they understand.
And what is good for Vikram may not be what's good for Jenny. So really, it's tailoring it to what each situation is like. So you can never go with predetermined notions or conceptions. You can never be sure that you're not going to make mistakes. That's the last thing we should be aware of. That as mediators, we make our mistakes and we learn from our mistakes and we continue to grow.
Well,
So
problem
listening to you just now, there's so much I learned.
But only thing that happens, but the problem with Jeannie is that her name is never pronounced correctly. Someone calls her Jean and Jenny, all that. She's Jeannie, right? Jeannie, are you Jeannie or not?
I'm Jeannie, yes.
Yeah.
And the challenge, as we talked at another session, is that it's a French, if you know French, it looks like Jean. So I will pretty much answer to anything. It's not a standard name. And then my last name is German. So you've got the competing ethnicities.
No, you want the J to be pronounced differently, Jeannie or something? We can do that if you.
No, Jeannie is perfect
Okay,
in the US.
okay.
That's how we do it here. So Jeannie is perfect. Leila, you used
Pardon?
Pardon?
Let me ask you a question. Do you change the language based on who's in front of you?
In terms of the terminology or the actual literal language that is spoken?
Even the literal language. The literal language.
Well, the literal language, if there's a participant or someone in the space who does not speak, everybody did not speak the language, we would most likely use an interpreter. And the mediator, the standard is that the mediator cannot be or should not be both the interpreter and the mediator. That would be a conflict of interest. So you would have an interpreter, you would arrange for the interpreter ahead of time, most likely. And you'd probably sit and talk with the interpreter to ensure that they understood their role, the process, the actual terminology, so they're not translating inappropriately. So they're not taking the word mediation and using arbitration, so you would really prepare the interpreter the same way you would prepare the prospective participants in the process. Does that sound similar to what you do?
Of course. We work with the interpreter so that they understand us and we understand them, and we're all on the same page. Yes, that's not what I was talking about. I was saying, supposing you meet one of the people in the mediation is a doctor, or you know, and or an artist. Do you find that you connect with them differently? You use possibly different, even in the way you speak and in your analogies. Do you change? Do you work with that?
That's such a great question. And I think if you every mediator you ask might give you a slightly different answer. I like what you said. I mean, I'm resonating with what you said earlier around how every mediation is different and that you don't want to go in with preconceptions. And if you're doing it exactly the same way every single time, then you're not flexing with the people in the room. And I think, for example, when you're summarizing, when at the very beginning, when each person has the opportunity to explain what has happened and what is bringing them to the mediation, when you're summarizing that, the summary that you give to the doctor is going to be using the doctor's root word. So you'll be telling her, so using that language so that she feels heard, right? But also checking in with the other person to make sure that the other person in the room, assuming it's just two people, is understanding, particularly if the doctor is using more sophisticated language. Let's say there's an educational difference in the room, maybe a vocabulary difference. So I would summarize what the doctor is saying using the doctor's words, but then I might also paraphrase or restate using words that might be a little more accessible. But I would make it be that I'm understanding, so that we're all understanding what is being talked about. Similarly, if the artist is talking about something and using the artistic language, again, summarizing, using that language, but maybe checking in to see if there's clarity of those different, if there's different terms being used, making sure. And then you can even say, well, I'm not sure what that means. Is that important to have a little better understanding? Because if I don't understand it, that's okay, as long as they understand it.
Yeah, you're right. Because I do find myself sometimes trying to use the language or the circumstances that they are comfortable with in order to establish that connection, especially in a private session. To explain something or to bring clarity and throw light, use what they are comfortable with. So it's not really the language, but maybe even the context. I try. I mean, I find myself trying to be there.
Yes, Ginny. So then what after that? Now take us further. Now the orientation has happened. They're all connected. They're feeling like participants. And
well, I want to go back to something else Layla said, because I think it was really important, because it is about the ability of the mediators or the facilitators, the circle keepers, to connect with the people in the room. And so that connection is of paramount importance. And very likely the participants may not even know what words you're using sometimes, if they feel that genuine rapport, understanding, if they're feeling heard. So I'm contradicting myself. And I want to acknowledge that rapport, that connection, that understanding, that facilitation, that heart that you bring into the space is of paramount importance, more so than language, other things. But the language can deter people, and it can be off-putting, and it can confuse. And so how can you do both? How can you use accessible language, set that stage, but still have that rapport and connection?
Vikram, I need to leave now. I have a prior engagement, but this has been such a wonderful conversation, Jenny. Great meeting you. And Vikram,
send you the link to the
full phrase. You cross the river by
Stepping on the
Feeling
stone,
the
feeling
stones.
the stones.
Feeling the
stones.
feeling the stones. That's a lovely.
Yes, yes.
I'm not familiar with it, so I was like, that's just lovely. And so absolutely right. That I will take that with me. Thank you.
Oh, it's amazing how in the mediation world, every person, every mediator you speak to, there's so much you can learn.
Yep.
So,
Exactly. The
and
people with the
you
mediator
do a
mind.
wonderful thing by bringing together all these people in this world. There's always a connection, a fraternity that mediation really creates. So
Yep.
thank you, Vikram.
Thank you, Leila, for dropping in, and we'll see you then. See you soon.
All the best.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Bye. Bye. Because Jeannie, the other thing that, of course, I think that you'll be getting to at some stage is also those technical terms which the mediation world uses, that part of it in general, then also them connected to the participants and how much do they hear those terms and whether we should be using them or not using them. So I'm thinking that you'll get there also. Of course, this is in the process, but otherwise.
But I think you're right about the technical terms. And part of what happens is I think we use the terms in training because we want people to understand things like self-determination. What does that mean, for example? But then you wouldn't use that word in an actual mediation room. Are you feeling self-determined? But it's making, but sometimes, you may see that. And that's why it's the beauty of the co-mediation model, where you can actually help then code and encode, and you're twice as likely with the co-mediator to be able to help people hear each other, to understand what is actually happening in the room, to not miss anything, and to recover if I were to make a mistake. If you and I are co-mediating and I said something that put one of the participants, nose out of joint, or upset the apple cart, you would be able to recover that. So you could say, I think what Jeannie's saying is this, or I think what Jeannie's trying to say is, which can be lovely, because I think, as Leila said, that humility, the fact that we are human as well. And the more we position ourselves as experts in the room, we can say we're experts in the process, or we're here to help you. We're trained in conflict and conflict resolution, but we don't know you. We don't know your solution. We don't know what's best for you. Only you know what will work best for you in this particular situation. But if we come in there with our clipboard and our pad of paper and positioning ourselves like that judge up on the bench, it changes the dynamic tremendously. So how are you setting that stage, and what is the what feelings are you trying to generate or engender in that space?
Exactly. I think that's the important thing, because the point is that being connected to the court system, just the fact that some rub off is going to happen is what we have to safeguard against. Totally. I mean, I just want it to be something so different because of the informality of it, first of all, which is something which gets lost. And like you said, you start off with some words and terminology which is being used in another process only because it is another dispute resolution which is happening. But it's a different method totally. It's totally something which, for me, of course, is really informal. So I don't bring that at all into it. But just the comfort where you, of course, have to also understand that for that person, this is the first time maybe, and might be the only time. Who knows? They're into it. But we, from that mediation world that we are in, we think, no, they are going to be familiar with certain things, and we put it across that way. So that also you have to be really careful about. Yeah.
And I think I think Layla touched on something a little bit as far as, she talked about the physician or the doctor versus the artist or different language. But also when people have representation, when there are attorneys in the room, as well as the people they're representing, how are you balancing that language? So if you talk about plaintiffs and defendants, so let's say there is a court case that's been filed and then referred to mediation. If you're assuming that everyone knows a plaintiff versus a defendant, and so how can you say, so who brought the case? Who initiated this? Who filed this in court? And so then without using some of that language, because, you will have people who are nodding like, and you think they're understanding, right? But it might just be that they're trying to understand, or they're trying to save face. There's been some work on, face saving, and how do you help people not be embarrassed or humiliated if they don't know something or understand. And so how do you, Tim Hadeen would say, I can be stupid mediator. You can put it on yourself. I'm not sure I fully understand. Can somebody explain to me?
Yeah, I think the point is that, like, before you came in, I was speaking to Lela, and I was saying the important thing is that I don't know anything. That's the kind of thing that you don't have the ego to tell yourself that even if I don't know anything, I have to show that I know something. Not at all. I know nothing. You go in with there and just be yourself. I was telling you, these are the two things you bring in. Lots gets taken care of in that.
Absolutely. And that humility that you bring into the room, the heart, that sense of overthinking and trying to analyze people or analyze their conflict, or, what's your bhatna, what's your watna, what's your malatna, what's your bhatna? It's like, come on, who talks like that?
Exactly. That's exactly what I said. Those technical terms that you might be familiar with, they're not. For them, it's a new world they've been thrown into, which they obviously don't want to be there for sure, but they have to be there because they want to resolve it also. So I think those are important things to be put out there for the mediation community as such, that please, all those theoretical aspects were for your reference. That's not to be brought into the mediation. Yes.
Yeah, and you might be thinking of that in the back of your head, the bhatna, watna, and so you could say, well, what's most likely to happen? Or you seem pretty certain that this is, that you're gonna, that the judge, if you go to court, that the judge is going to rule in your favor. Well, what would happen if she didn't, right? If they didn't find for you. And so, to really help them think through it without using that language, particularly if someone is throwing around that language. I don't know if you've had people in the mediation room who come in having had training or thinking they know, and so they're trying to show you, the mediator, that they know all the terms and the language, right? And then particularly when there are other participants who don't know.
But Jenny, I really want to move to, of course, one part which I always keep talking about, the user getting confused with this entire facilitative, evaluative, transformative, that aspect of it, that I have a bit of an issue with.
Yeah, and I noticed you had a session, and I wasn't able to listen to it yet, on models. Was that on? And so, was there any consensus, or how did that end up?
No, that was like, of course, we were talking about the models, and of course, like I was saying, that whole concept of looking at it from a much larger perspective, from the global perspective, we have to look at, maybe, look, it's not going to be one model, but open ourselves. The idea was expanding the framework kind of thing. So bring in good things from other parts of the world and see how they can be used, rather than getting stuck in those terms and then finding out that they're not relevant or they don't connect with the people. That.
Yeah, I'm glad. I think that idea of a global glossary of terms, is there a way to come to an agreement, and what are the terms, and what do we mean by the different words? Because if we don't know, how do we expect the participants to know, right?
Because it starts with the basic thing. It starts with mediation. What does that word mean to people? That I think that by itself is something which is, like I was just telling Leila also, this whole the blind man and the elephant situation. So you be using that term and very nicely talking about it and thinking that we just assume that the other, first of all, our understanding of it and the other person's understanding of it might be different.
Absolutely. And I think I love Layla when she said that when she was asked by the Chief Justice to start a mediation program, she was like, was it meditation? What is he asking of me? And so imagine the participants and how they're feeling if they don't truly know. And I think sometimes, even, that simple definition, we're just going to help you have a conversation and see, what's important to you, give you the chance to talk about what's important to you, and see how you might be able to work out an agreement with your neighbor, with your coworker, with your boss, so that they understand that they have voice, or that they will have that chance, and that their ideas are there, to think about. And then when you're preparing people, can you think about 3 or 4 things you can offer, or 3 or 4 things that you would like to see happen? What's most important to you, but what else is important to you? But what else, what do you need? But what can you do to make this better?
Well, I think the first thing I really want, which I like to clarify, is what do they think what are they expecting from the process? Because I'm telling you, some people, because the way the word goes around and everyone is talking about it differently, they're looking at the process from different angles. They don't even, so I think first thing to be able to sit with them and understand what they think the process is all about. So I find that a good starting point.
Yeah, I think that's lovely. What do they hope? I will sometimes say, what are you hoping to have happen here today? And then that can particularly clarify if they're thinking that the mediator is going to make a decision for them.
Exactly.
That you're going to say who's right or say who's wrong. But something really basic. What are you hoping to have happen here today?
No, but what you just said, actually, that's the thing, that they sometimes might just think that's what the whole thing is all about. And finally, someone is going to decide for them and tell them this is how it has to be done. And that's something that you better to clarify at the earliest stage, rather than at a point when they think, oh, this was not what we were looking for. We have to tell us what to do, kind of thing. So I think that terminology, in the sense of the starting point, mediation itself, what do people understand from that? It starts from there. Because I'm saying that here, of course, with terminology, I want to also get into, of course, you were looking at it from a different perspective. I'm still on the mediation conciliation aspect of it. The terminology there, what is the understanding of those words? We had one session on that, which was obviously, for me, that's important because of the fact that, like I said, in India, that law that we have is called conciliation. And I'm saying that's the best law on mediation. So, and most of the people in India don't agree with me on that, because they're still, I don't know what the reasons are. I'm not going to get into that. So that by itself, I mean, these are terms which are used, people don't understand, and then you confuse the user. So basically, I don't want the user to be confused. It should be clear to the user as to it's their process, what they want from it, everything. They should be clear on that, and don't confuse them with anything technical which is not relevant with the, I mean that technical word. Why? I don't even understand why to use those technical terminology to show them that yes, we know a lot and we're very well educated in the whole thing. I don't know. I'm not, so I that's the way I am. So I'm not so well educated. I'm illiterate in that sense. So
Well, but it's like the medical field. I mean, if you draw that analogy, I mean, doctors need people to translate for them, to the patients. And there's can be such a breakdown there. And so that happens in the legal world too. And so the more we have been annexed or co-opted by the legal world, and the more we use those terms, the less accessible this is going to be. And so much of what lawyers do, well, depends, I shouldn't say it like that, but oftentimes lawyers are helping the people they represent understand what is happening, in the courtroom and the process. because it is, you see it on TV, but if that's your first time walking in, but then it's on us as the mediators to help everyone understand what happens in the mediation space.
So what else, Jeannie? What other aspects where would terminology come which we need to simplify, or first of all have a understanding which is kind of across the board, which stays the same? So any other term that you feel it creates an issue?
Well, I think the term mediation, I mean, when you talked about the difference, mediation, conciliation, and all of those modifiers, I appreciate the nuance and the difference between, facilitative and transformative and some of those other modifiers. But as you said, is there any way to get it to the essence so that to make it accessible so that people understand what this is going to look like, and how can we narrow? So I know there's a push with some people to take evaluative mediation and take that out of the equation altogether. It's not mediation, or it is a different process. It's closer to arbitration. Do not put it into a facility, a large, or to make the facilitative model the default.
Exactly. That's what I'm saying, that's where the problem lies for the user. Because the more all these technical things you keep talking about, the more the user doesn't understand what they're getting into, and then you scare them. And if they get scared of the process, what use is it? And like you said, that some people might believe it's closer to arbitration. But the point is finally that the process is something that the participants have to be comfortable with. And in the initial stage, just the fact that someone goes and says, "Oh, I am just a facilitator," they don't know what that means. What do you mean? I mean, you're not going to tell them that. So you are going to go through with the process the way you want to. On the other end, if they were looking for a certain evaluative aspect of it from that, and it did not come out, they're participating in the process. Really, does it take away from it? I mean, you're going through with it. Of course, I don't like these divisions that people make. You don't tie your hands. You go the way you flow. If there is a requirement of a certain kind, it comes there. It doesn't move away from mediation for me. Like you said, the purists call that mediation, and this is not mediation. Why do we keep doing that? This is like religion. I think finally it becomes like religion. And this is where how things become a problem in religion. The same thing you're doing here. Don't do that, please. That's what I keep saying.
You have we call them orthodoxies, all these different orthodoxies, and people who are adherents as opposed to, and I think if you have that opportunity, and we talked about this last week or the week before, to ask people, what do they hope to see happen? Who would they like to see? Where would they like to meet? When would they like to meet? Who should be part of this process? What's important to them about the mediators or facilitators, the people that are going to help them, so that they can help design this process. And so to not make those assumptions, even to the point that hands-off idea where they pick where they sit in the space. Some people say, well, you sit here, you sit here. Well, maybe somebody's more comfortable sitting by the door and somebody wants to sit by the window. Why are we controlling some of that? So to what degree can we have the participants be involved in designing the process so that it truly meets their needs? And then as part of that, if in the design they say, well, I really want somebody to make a decision, then you can say, well, that's what the courts are for. The courts will make a decision for you. And some people really want or need that. They want someone to blame, or someone they don't want to be their fault.
No, well, look, in my case, it'll be different. What I'm going to be looking at, if someone asks me that question, is, look, I may suggest, but finally it's your decision. So I may suggest, because I'm not in that purist there at all. There are points where I will suggest. Like I say, actively involved in the process. I like to be actively involved in the process, and if it means suggesting, it means suggesting, and not a problem at all. I have no issue with that. And if people are not comfortable with the process, they have the option of not being part of it. It's not that you are stuck in it. But then for me to not to be myself will not be correct. If they,
For you as the mediator to not be yourself?
yeah, if I'm
Yeah.
not myself, yeah.
Well, you need to be true to yourself, and you need to know whether you should be the mediator or not. And so there may be cases that come that you have the opportunity to mediate where you say, I cannot do this. I should not do this. It's too close to home. I can't be neutral. For any number of reasons. You're smiling. What are you thinking?
Because that is what happened. Yeah, I don't know whether did you meet Mr. Panchu? You didn't meet Mr. Panchu. He's a senior mediator. He's like the pioneer of. He started the first court mediation center in India, and also a senior mediator. I mean, so we did a co-mediation, and from that mediation, another mediation connected to that came out, and there were, of course, different participants obviously coming on from one side. One participant was the same, the other one was different, and I just did not actually like that approach to the whole point, because it was a lawyer driven process and they were looking at it very differently, and of course there were other aspects to it, and I refused. And he did not, of course he did not like it, definitely. And of course we had a long conversation. I said, look, we have to look at it from the larger good, because I can see that this person is just looking for an opportunity to in some way put the process in disrepute in whatever way the person would do it, and I can't take that risk. For me, the mediation is just about developing in the country and outside the court system. And if this person is going to one loose conversation somewhere, one loose statement somewhere, it's just something that can put people off, because word of mouth goes around. If you have 100 positive and one negative, you can balance it out. But if you have nothing on the positives and nothing on the negatives, and something comes out, that is 100%. So that was what. So I actually I don't do it. That's one part I don't do. The other thing is, if I don't think they're ready, I don't have to. I mean, if I feel they should sit together, they should sit together. I'm not going to. It's like same thing with litigation. If you think that you're at a stage when you should be trying to resolve it through mediation, you should tell the people that, okay, you resolve it through mediation. I mean, I'm saying if lawyers should be doing that. If it's not ready for litigation, it should not go into litigation. They should be advising them. So same thing applies to mediators. If it's not ready for mediation, and if they should be negotiating themselves, sitting together, send them there. And you don't have to put them in a process which you feel they should not be at that point of time. That's another aspect, not for coming from there.
Absolutely. I remember a parenting time. So in Minnesota and in many states, people who have divorced will often meet with mediators once the divorce is set to work out their parenting time. So how they're going to be parents together, even though they're no longer married. And these parents kept coming back to negotiate, to revise their parenting time. And the mediator said, we really think you can do this yourselves. You now you don't need to come, you don't need to pay the money, you don't need to take the time out. And they both said, we really like the structure of the process. This really helps us. They're still not part of the reason, they divorced was their inability to communicate effectively. And so having that structure, that the process provided, somebody following their conversation, somebody helping them put together, well, this is what you've agreed upon. They found that really helpful. And so, yes, in some cases you can, the mediator usually said, yes, you can do this yourselves. And they were like, yes, but this is more comfortable for us.
Yeah. So that you have to, obviously. I'm saying that, of course, your gauge of it also, and of course you take the parties into, or the participants into that conversation. Definitely. I mean, that of course you have to look at it from their perspective. But I'm just trying to say that it's not that everything that comes to you have to sit down and say, okay, I'll be your mediator. It's still a conversation you have to have and see what the situation is, and where they should have their conversation themselves is also important. Maybe take it as part of the process. But sometimes you have to do that also, which is what I think. Sometimes people don't do that, thinking that, oh, they've come for mediation, let's mediate. So,
Mhm.
I mean,
Yeah,
that's
and you're right. You might say this is not the right process for you, or particularly you need a judge to make this decision, or you can do this yourself, or the wrong people are in the room. We don't have the decision makers. You can have any number of, so yes, to be attuned to that. I had another issue that I'm not quite sure where I stand on this. So this is like to have your perspective. And some years ago, I met a mediator whose card had a modifier in front of the word mediator, and it was Christian mediator. Okay, so he was a Christian mediator. And my initial response was, how are you neutral when you're putting forth a certain set of values? And are you able to be neutral? In the class I taught at George Mason last year, there was a group of students who worked on faith-based mediation. And also a few years ago when ACR was in Texas, we went and saw an Islamic mediation group that was internal to their faith. And so I think where I am coming right now is that idea that if you are within a faith and it's very clear, that makes sense, but that if you are, good morning, where I am, it's morning.
okay. First of all, you have to get the pronunciation of a name right. What would you say? I'll get
I
it
would
right.
say, let's see, I'm not sure of country of origin, but Yonca, Yonca,
Yes,
Yonca,
Yonca. She's Yonca. She's from
Yonca.
Turkey.
Yonca,
She's from Turkey.
Yonca,
Yonca is from
Turkey,
Turkey.
Yonca,
Yeah.
Yonca. Yeah,
Yes.
Yonca. Nice
Nice.
to meet you. Nice to meet you. So, we've talked about those other modifiers, Vikram, around transformative and evaluative and all of that, but I'm not sure if you've come across or where you sit when people have faith-based or other types of personal modifiers. And in some ways it might be like, well, decide if you're, he said, decide if you're going to use me or not, because this is how I use mediation. I had I've trained several Catholic priests, or have had them in trainings that I've done. And so how do they use those skills within their faith?
Yeah, not really interestingly, what happened today itself, I spoke to someone and I wanted the concept of one, of course, mediation, but the other aspect is restorative justice, which you also would come into, the aspect of mediation and restorative justice in Islam. So that topic I have put up on Wednesday, on 29th. So that is for me, of course, I mean, look, if there is something which comes from someone's faith, if there is a certain aspect that can be taken from there, not a problem at all, as long as, look at the point is the end result that they're looking for. And if someone can give them some kind of a comfort there, whatever, I mean, I have no issue with that aspect of it. As long as, look, finally, the thing is that if you're not preaching, it's perfectly all right if you're mediating. But if you are preaching to them, then there's a different concept altogether.
But one of the questions that this group of students, which were from different faiths, talked about was, if you are mediating in a faith context, do you open with prayer? Do you use your faith construct within the mediation space? So let's say, and in this mosque in Plano, I think it was in Texas, with family issues, they were very faith-based. They were very grounded, because these were families in that particular faith. So do we need those modifiers? And if you are a mediator that is coming from, we all, if you have a faith context or no faith context, do you disclose that or not, right? Like, you might disclose, I'm an attorney, but I'm not using those skills here in the room, or I'm a social worker, but I'm a mediator here today. To what degree does that construct affect how you are in the mediation room?
Because, yeah, I think that finally the point is that what are you trying to push? Are you going to push an agenda? Then obviously you have to come across. If you're not pushing an agenda and you have, like, the whole concept of that neutrality that we were discussing. No, the point is that you might have those whatever thoughts, but when you move here, do you bring that with you, or are you going to take them in a certain direction? You've already thought about it and you want to moralize into it, or whatever. That becomes, I think, a totally different discussion. But the important part here is that, like you were saying about when you start with a prayer. We had someone from Brazil. We were talking about creativity, innovation, and mediation. So she was talking about how she plays mantras in her sometimes to create an atmosphere. Now, if I am playing it and say, "Oh, he's bringing in his religion into it," but the point is, a mantra is not. There's no religion aspect of it. It's just a mantra. It's just certain vibrations. What gives you those good vibrations? Some music gives it to you. A mantra gives it to you. So people start connecting a lot of things to and try to put this whole branding on religion on everything. I think we have to also get out of that. Everything is not religion being pushed, but yes, religion is also being pushed. So both ends, both of them are happening at the same time. And for me, look, I mean, there are all kinds of people doing all kinds of things, and if someone is comfortable sitting with a priest and getting that mediation done, and the priest is still not telling them what to do, in the sense forcing them to do something, but suggesting something, perfectly all right, as long they have trust in that priest. And when I keep saying that, if that social pressure in some way keeps them together and can get the certain solution there, why not? I mean, it's idea is finally what these participants are comfortable with. I mean, all this religion aspect of it, all that decision, all that, I mean, conversation around it, I think is a little too much, which happens around it. Just keep it away. Let people be people. Don't put labels on people. Okay, so in this case, he wants to be called that. Not a problem. If someone is comfortable with a person like that, let them be. If that's, but Yoncha, yeah, let me just tell her, we're talking about terminology and mediation, all these technical terms which come into play. Jeannie, and in the beginning, was telling us very interesting things. She says a lot of rub off of the court system has come into mediation. So she doesn't like the word usage of parties. Don't call them parties. Call them participants.
Or
Don't say
people, or people.
people. Don't say I'm giving you an opening statement. This is a very court kind of thing. Orientation. She wants to use language where people connect with it on a different level. So that's the conversation we were having before this. So Jeannie, there might not be too much time to go any further. So if there is anything you feel or we've left out, or which is a major aspect of terminology. Look, you said about the process, yes, to connect them with the process. So try and stay away from terminology which will still have a rub off of the court system. That's one part of it.
There's so much of that we aren't even aware of. We don't, it's become part of the mediation argot, how we speak and our lingo, without even realizing that they are more court terms that belong in court as opposed to in the mediation room. So as we're trying to make mediation more accessible and remember our origins, the point is just that the language we use is also important. But as we talked about with Layla, it's also the humility you bring in, and being able to have rapport and connection with people, and that is even more important. But they all, I think, for me, they go together.
Yeah, because that's of course the other aspect of it. We're sticking to the terminology. What I brought in, that the fact that don't confuse the user, don't bring in terminology which you are familiar with, but they're not part of this world. They've just come in for that particular mediation and they're going to go away. We don't have to educate them on all the technical terminology in the world in that session or in those sessions. So that's one part. Anything else, broader point that you want to?
I appreciate the conversation and the learnings. I always come away learning. I have things written down. It's always exciting when you learn something new.
Good. It was always nice. Well, yesterday I was having a conversation with Lisa in one of the sessions, and I said, Jeannie is also old school like you. I was telling her, we also agree to disagree on a lot of things. I said, you both of you will get along very well. I don't know whether you people have interacted or not, but that part of it, I found that old school part was quite the same.
And maybe just the old part too, right?
But those certain things.
To have generational differences. So what are you and Yoncha talking about?
This is the Singapore Convention. Singapore Convention in the digital era.
So
That is
boring questions.
So what
It
I'm
was
doing, yeah.
fantastic.
So what I do is I'll end this session here.